takes it.
This is an NBC News special report. Here's Savannah Guthrie.
Hi there. Good morning. We come on the air with breaking news from the Supreme Court this morning. A major decision having to do with abortion and reproductive rights, specifically the right to an abortion when it is medically necessary for the health of the mother. The court has just decided to hold the issue and not decide the case that was before it. This pitted Idaho state law, one of the strictest abortion bans in the country, against federal law and what to do when a woman comes in and her health is at risk and she may need an emergency abortion. I've got Laura Jarrett here, our legal correspondent, Kristen Welker, as well. First of all, we should just say that a copy of this opinion was inadvertently posted on the court's website yesterday. At a very cursory glance, this appears to be the same decision that was released accidentally yesterday. We'll line by line it.
Yes.
But let's get to then. Assuming that is the case, and what we've read of it so far, this is a decision that the Supreme Court has essentially decided not to make yet.
Yes,
Explain.
they're kicking the can down the road about whether there is a real conflict between federal law that requires hospitals that receive federal funding, which is most of them at this point, to perform abortions when it is medically necessary to save a woman's health, not her life, but her health. Say she comes in with an infection, something like that, where she's not on the verge of death, but she's in really dire straits. And federal law says you have to provide an emergency abortion if a doctor thinks it's necessary in that situation. Idaho says, no, it's only if it's to save the life of the mother. And therefore, that's the conflict. Where that sort of daylight is between federal and state law is what this whole case was about.
And we're talking about Idaho, but there are, six states that have essentially this same very, very strict abortion ban. You can only have an abortion to save the life of the mother, not the health of the mother. Now, what's interesting about this is the court has said, we dismissed this case. It was improvidently granted. That's legalese for, we shouldn't have taken this case.
It's legally, we shouldn't have taken it.
But they did take it, and now they say that was a mistake.
And this issue is going to come up again because, as you mentioned, there are not just Idaho, there's women in all these other states, including Texas, which has this exact same issue right before the court. And that's why both we see conservatives and liberals on this court accusing their colleagues in really pointed language here, I should point out, it's pretty sharp, saying you're dodging something here. This is a duck. This is a punt. This is Justice Alito and Justice Jackson, polar opposites on the merits, but on the duck, they're in alignment here, saying you have to take this on because of that conflict. It's leaving essentially everybody in limbo. If women in Idaho today can get an emergency abortion, but women in Texas can't, and women in other states can't, and so they're saying this is going to be capable of repetition. So you should have solved it now, reconciled that conflict now, and instead, the lower court decision in Idaho is what's going to stand.
Yeah, so they're basically the dissenters are saying to the majority, you kick the can down the road, you lack the guts because it's a difficult decision. And that brings me to Kristen Welker, because of course the justices aren't supposed to think about this, and we don't know whether they are, but there is an election upon us, and this issue of abortion rights and the fallout from the Dobbs decision that overturned Roe v. Wade reverberates through this election.
Savannah, it is one of the biggest X factors in this election. We're going to see that on the display tonight when the two candidates face off the first general election debate. We know that former President Trump, who proudly says, yes, he's responsible for having Roe v. Wade overturned because he appointed the 3 conservative Supreme Court justices who made that possible. He's also said, politically speaking, it is a very difficult issue for Republicans. So he said this should be a matter that gets decided by the states.
But that's what's so interesting. Can I just interrupt you right here? Because when he says, let's let the states decide, we're seeing in the real world, the state law and the federal law are on a collision course.
And that's the point that you are going to hear, I would expect, and I've been working my phones, you're going to hear President Biden tried to make tonight, that not only is this a murky, complicated, dangerous picture for women in these states that do have these very strict abortion restrictions, but it is also, he will likely argue, you will see President Trump try to impose a federal ban, despite the fact that Trump has said that's not something he's going to do. 60%, by the way, of Americans have said that they are opposed to Roe v. Wade having been overturned, and we've seen this as an energizing issue in states from Kansas to Kentucky to Ohio. It's on the ballot in 9 states right now.
So, I mean, does postponement, essentially kicking the can down the road, is that something that inures to the benefit of the Trump campaign?
It does, and here's why. I think that ultimately speaking, this would have given President Biden a little bit more grist to make the argument if, for example, they had sided with Idaho, to make the argument, look at how dangerous this is for the women in Idaho. But I don't think he's going to let it go. Again, I think he's going to make that argument that we just talked about, that this is a murky picture and that in and of itself is quite complicated. Now, if the court had decided with Idaho, I think that the administration would have talked potentially about some executive actions to really try to capitalize on that. But this is going to be a big topic tonight, Savannah.
Well, we should point out the law that is at issue here, the federal law that's at issue, doesn't say anything about abortion. It just says you have to provide emergency stabilizing care. It's the Biden administration's interpretation of that law that is what started this whole thing off. So once they decided to have that interpretation was because of Dobbs. And Alito calls them out on that and says they were scrambling to figure out what to do after the Dobbs decision came down overturning Roe. And they said, aha, we found EMTALA, this federal law that says you have to provide emergency care. And so for the conservatives, they're reading into this federal law that it's about abortion. But the text of it doesn't say anything about abortion.
It doesn't, but in real life, this has actually happened where Idaho bans the abortions to save, except for to save the very life of the mother. And you have had patients in Idaho, you've interviewed them, who had to be airlifted out.
Yeah, and doctors say at bottom, they need clarity on this because they are facing criminal prosecution if they violate this law, right? So it's not just the loss of their medical license, it's the loss of their liberty if they do something to violate their state ban. And they're also facing lawsuits from the feds and the federal sides if they violate their patient's right and don't provide the abortion. So they're really between a rock and a hard place.
And that's why Justice Alito and Justice Jackson, again, on two sides of the ideological pole, are basically saying this decision is not going to get any easier. You don't need more information. You don't need more legal briefs. You can decide it now, and you should.
And they're saying, why did you take it in the first place? Months ago, when they first took this case, they didn't have to. It went through an odd, sort of unusual route to get here.
They skipped, like the appellate courts to fast track it.
Exactly.
And then they said it was too fast.
A lower court had already blocked Idaho's law on the same grounds that's going to stand today. And so that's why Alito and Jackson are saying, what changed in those months?
Listen, we only have 30 seconds before we wrap up. We're still waiting a very consequential case from the Supreme Court on whether or not former President Trump is immune from criminal prosecution and to what extent that immunity might extend.
And we'll get that decision potentially tomorrow or Monday.
And of course, Trump has tried to capitalize on all of his criminal cases.
And there's a debate tonight. I'll see you ladies late tonight. NBC News will have special coverage of that debate, 9 o'clock Eastern time. More on our streaming network right now. NBC News Now on this decision. We've got a full wrap up on nightly news, and we will see you tonight at 9 for the presidential debate. Thanks for watching.